Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to do an if you like this fantasy book, you should read that one. I have done many of these videos before, not just for fantasy, but also for science fiction, horror, and thriller. So I'm going to have a playlist link down below and in the cards if I remember. And I just really enjoy watching these videos. I enjoy doing these videos. I think it's a great way to find recommendations because when you finish a really good book and you're looking for something similar, these videos give a lot of inspiration for that. And of course, it's all subjective. So if you're watching this and you disagree with one of my picks, I would love to hear your recommendation instead. And if you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk about Jade City by Fonda Lee, which is the first book in the Green Bone saga. And this, I think, is pretty well known in book 2, but basically it's an urban fantasy involving the use of the jade that allows people to enhance their martial abilities. So we follow different family clans that are fighting for territory and control over the jade in their region. And this story is beloved for so many reasons. And like most people, I was eager to find any book that was even slightly similar. And the book I want to recommend in comparison is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang, and this is a book that's actually a standalone fantasy. It's also set in the modern time, just like Jade City, and in the story we follow a family. So particularly we get perspectives of the mother and also the son. They are in charge of protecting their nation because of the geographical location of where they are stationed, and within the society, just like in Jade City, they have martial abilities that they are training. And again, we follow the different perspectives, so again, it's very family-centered. This one, I will say, is far less gritty. My complaint, if I had one, is the fact that I did find the son especially to be very, very naive, and I found the character motivations to be much simpler than in Jade City, where I found that the characters were all very complex and morally gray, and you just got to see the multifaceted aspects of their personalities. And so this one definitely is more straightforward. Again, it's a standalone, but it does have similar themes. Of course, it's both Asian inspired. And with this standalone, you do get lots of good action. It definitely feels like an anime. The magic system is very similar to something like Airbender, so if you enjoy the use of the different elements, you'll get that in this one. And like I said, it's not perfect. I know a lot of people have given this one 5 stars. For me, it's less so, but it is similar. It definitely had those similar vibes, and I know other people have also found that comparison. So if you're looking for something similar, this is the direction I can first point you in. Now, I'm gonna actually cheat and include one more recommendation for Jade City, and it's definitely a cheat because it's not even fantasy. The book I want to recommend in comparison is 36 Streets by T.R. Napper, and this is a cyberpunk novel, so bear with me for those of you that only read fantasy. I really do think that you should give this a try. So while I mentioned The Sword of Kaigen wasn't entirely to my taste, this one, however, I really loved. This is a cyberpunk novel that follows a young woman who is of a multiracial descent, and she is living in a Chinese occupied land. There is a lot of Vietnamese influence within the society. So again, you have kind of Eastern different influences that are kind of non-European, which I like. This book has a really fierce, gritty main character. She is a little bit unlikable, but unlikable in the same way that you would describe characters in Jade City. They're unlikable, but you still enjoy following them. This book is definitely very adult, with adult content and language and sexual activity and all those good things that just make it very mature. And the story itself is just so well plotted. The world building is fantastic. So yes, this is cyberpunk, but if you love the world building in Jade City and you like a story that explores a whole nother world, but one that's very accessible, feels very urban, this one's going to give you similar feels. And I do think that it has enough appeal to those of you that, again, read more fantasy, just because of the type of story it is. It doesn't get bogged down in the hard science. Instead, the world building and the technology is just used to really be this interesting background, this great atmosphere to the story. You find out that there is a video game that has consequences. There's a mystery with someone who has been murdered, and you have to puzzle it all out. And that is all just within a standalone book. So I cannot recommend this one enough. In my opinion, it's underhyped because I don't see enough people picking it up, and I really loved it. I've read it several times now, and yeah, just cannot get enough of it. Would love to see more people picking it up. Next, I want to talk about The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. This is a super dense, wonderful series that is told over 3 novels that is science fiction and fantasy all wrapped up into one. In this first story, we follow 3 different perspectives, one being a young child, one being a young woman in training, and then we also follow a mother who has recently lost their child. This book is heavily emotional, heavily dark and gritty. We deal with a world where certain people people have the ability to move earth with their bodies and have that ability, but it's actually seen as something kind of to be looked down upon. And so because of that, those people are treated as a lower class, and we get to see the racial, or I guess magical, divide within this world. It's so topical, it is diverse and queer, and just very well plotted, very well structured in terms of a book. It's a book you do not want to have spoiled for yourself, and I really encourage you to read all 3 books back to back because it really reads like a cohesive story. And I gotta say, it's incredibly unique. So I'm actually quite shocked that I have a comparison for this book, because I never thought I would find another book that would give me similar vibes. And I'm really happy to be able to compare it to the Worldbreaker saga. These are the second 2 books, the first book being The Broken Mirror, all by Cameron Hurley. And this is a really gritty epic fantasy that is set in another world, or rather multiple worlds, because this involves multiverses. So while again this is fantasy, it definitely has a science fiction angle to it. The world building is incredible, the characters are diverse and queer and interesting, and once again you deal with a lot of oppression, racial divide. There is tons of content warnings for very, very difficult material. There is lots of violence and harm to different people, but I like a story that's really dark and complex with morally gray characters. It's epic, it's different, it's just so unique. Again, these are 2 books that in a way are similar, but they're also very unique in their own way and really stand up on their own. But yeah, highly recommend these ones. I feel like they don't get as much love as N.K. Jemisin's, and I don't know why. Definitely start back at the beginning with The Mirror Empire, but oh my goodness, I love this so much, and yeah, would love to see more people picking this up. Next up, we have The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is the first book in an epic East Indian inspired fantasy series, and within this story we follow a young woman who has been sentenced to death by her brother, but she refuses to be burnt in the fire, and so she goes on the run, gets tied up with another young woman. There's a sapphic romance that ensues, and epic political maneuvering all throughout. So this is a book that I did enjoy, but I'll admit this first book I didn't completely love, and so I was really happy to find another Eastern inspired fantasy series that I do think gave me similar vibes, a similar setup, but went more in a direction I prefer. And that is Upon a Burning Throne by Ashok K. Banker. And this is once again epic East Indian fantasy. And this story we follow multiple perspectives, but the primary setup is that we follow 2 babies at the beginning who become young men, but they are brought to a fire in order to determine if they are worthy of ruling the world. One of them is albino, the other one is blind, and so because of what is seen as their disabilities, they are decided to have to rule together. And there's also another person vying for the throne, and it basically is a kind of a setup of like, you know, Game of Thrones, where you have different people vying for the crown, and then you have a lot of diverse aspects. I really like how the author handles, of course, first disabilities, but also the role of women in the society. And I just really like this. It's very epic in scale, it's very action-packed, but I'm not someone who loves action in books. Often I have trouble imagining what's happening, but this book was really easy to follow, and despite the multiple characters, the multiple settings, all of that, the gods, the world, the magic, everything, it just really worked well for me, and so I do recommend this one. I thought it was really good. First book in a new series, and one that you should definitely be checking out. And if you've already taken my suggestion and picked up Upon a Burning Throne, I do have a recommendation for that, and that is Kakai. And this is a standalone epic fantasy that once again is East Indian inspired, and in this story we follow a young woman who is a princess. Her mother used to tell her stories of the gods, which again are pulled from East Indian mythology, and her mother was sent away, and now as she is getting older, she's getting pushed into the traditional role of women in this society, but she fights against that, and well, it turns out perhaps she has some own magical abilities, and so the story goes from there as she takes off on her own epic adventure, basically coming of age. This is a beautiful story. It is well written with great, well-rounded characters. It's very intricate and is a good balance between like really good characters, really good writing, and a narrative that moves forward. And again, it's only a standalone, so there's a lot of story packed into what is relatively a small package. And so I do think if you love Upon a Burning Throne, you're going to also enjoy this one, because it definitely has similar themes, character work, political maneuvering, and all of that. So highly recommend this one as well. And I also want to talk about a book recommendation for The Clan of the Cave Bear by Jean M. Bareilles. And this is a really classic historical fantasy book that's really light on the fantasy elements. There's basically a little bit of mythology that could be possible, but this book is definitely much more historical. Essentially, we follow a young woman who is set back in prehistoric times. She has grown up with the Neanderthals. I always say that word wrong, but instead she is now going off to live and find her own people, and so she is meeting with prehistoric humans, and the story goes from there. There's a lot of romance in the story, but there's also a lot of really interesting historical details. Obviously, the author had to make a lot of guesses, but from my understanding from all the research I've done is they really did do their homework to make the best guesses that they could and just incorporate a really well-rounded world and really ideas that could have been very possible. And I thought it was, yeah, very well done, very interesting, so out of the box, and again, a little bit light on the fantasy side, but if you like a book like that, I also have a more modern recommendation to go along with it, and that recommendation is The Wolf and the Whale by Georgiana Max Brodsky, and this is a standalone fantasy book that is inspired by both Viking and Inuit mythology. And so we follow a young person who turns out to be two-spirited, so they are somewhat gender fluid. They have both male and female characteristics, and within the story there is a major romance point, so if you enjoy that aspect of the Clan Bear books, then you also would enjoy that as well. I like the world building in this one. I will admit I actually prefer the first books that I'm recommending. I don't think that this one is my personal favorite, but it definitely had a lot of elements I really like. It's cold winter fiction. It has diverse characters, queer representation, all of that. So I definitely saw a lot of similarities there. I just preferred how it was managed in the Clan Bear books. So if you like those and you're looking for something more, I might point you in this direction. And finally, if you like The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, and this is a story that follows a young woman, a thief, who at the beginning of the story gets tied up with a djinn and discovers that there is a whole nother world out there. They move from what is Egypt over to the world of the djinn and get pulled into a larger plot. I liked some of the aspects to this. I definitely liked the Egyptian or Eastern setting to the story, but I'll be honest, the romance in this got a bit too heavy-handed for me. I believe this book is marketed as adult, but it definitely felt like a YA crossover or just straight YA, and so it wasn't entirely to my taste, so I never did continue on with the series. And so I want to recommend a book that is similar to that, but in my opinion is more to my taste, and that is The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. And this is the first book in an epic Middle Eastern fantasy series. In this one, we follow a young woman who is also a thief, and she gets tied in with a reluctant prince. There is djinn hunting within this book, so yes, there's djinn involved, but the way that they are brought into this world is different because they are almost being hunted down to extinction. I love the world building, the magic, the setup. Everything about this book was just beautiful. There is some romance in this book, but unlike an S.A. Chakraborty, I found this one to be much more palatable and I actually quite enjoyed it, even though I don't tend to love romance. I just thought that the character work was great, it was complex, the world building is beautiful, and within this book you basically get stories within stories, which is very reminiscent of Arabian Nights, and so I think that it does really good nods to some of the traditional work of Middle Eastern fiction, but also feeling incredibly new and fresh. So if you haven't yet checked out this series, highly recommend. I love this book and would love to see more people picking up this series. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And as well, you can totally disagree with me. If you have recommendations of books that you think are better pairings, I would love to hear them in the comments. Or if you're looking for a pairing for a particular fantasy book or science fiction, definitely leave me a note down below and I can try to work it into a future video. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of adult science fiction, fantasy, horror, and thrillers and true crime. And if you want to help me out, you can give this video a thumbs up, share it around online, drop a little emoji, even if it's just a little fantasy character like a castle, dragon, or crown. And if you're still around, thank you so much. You can hit that little notification bell so that you never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.